Benjamin Netanyahu wants to be remembered as the
protector of Israel.
But on his watch, the country suffered the worst atrocity in its history. By exploring his past and speaking to experts and former colleagues of the Prime Minister, we look at how his words and actions over many years contributed to the latest conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and whether the career of a man who's been written off so many times before can survive this war. It's September 22nd, 2023, and at the UN General Assembly, Netanyahu is explaining how the Abraham Accords, diplomatic deals with Arab and Muslim nations, have transformed the Middle East.
My approach to peace was rejected by the so-called experts. Well, they were wrong. The Abraham Accords heralded the dawn of a new age of peace.
The first deals were signed in 2020 and are central to his approach to secure Israel's security, stabilize relationships with key players in the region, and sideline the issue of Palestine in the process. And it appears to be working.
A lot of the people voting for him would say, I don't really like this guy, I don't really trust this guy, but I think on the fundamental issues of things like Israeli security, you can't really argue with the results.
Thank you.
But little more than 2 weeks after his triumphant speech at the UN, October the 7th, 2023. Israel is attacked with around 1,200 people killed and close to 240 taken hostage. Men, women and children. While the atrocities are committed by Hamas, a prescribed terrorist group by many Western countries, a lot of Israelis are angry at their government too. Recent polling paints a dire picture for Netanyahu personally. One survey says more than 3/4 of the public want him to resign after the war. And when asked who in the government is responsible for October 7th, Netanyahu takes most of the blame.
He failed on the fundamental promise he made to Israel's people, which was to keep them safe.
It's not only that many Israelis feel let down by Netanyahu's government, he's also accused of playing into Hamas's hands. It's been reported he empowered the militant group by allowing millions of dollars, some stuffed into suitcases, to be funneled into Gaza for years. And in 2011, he secures the release of Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit, who had been captured by Hamas. But to do it, Israel releases more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, including Yahya Sinwar, now believed to be the mastermind behind October 7th. But why did Israel do that, and allow funds to flow to a group that denies Israel's right to exist? It's been reported that Netanyahu told Likud party members in a private meeting that he wanted to drive a wedge between Hamas in Gaza and their rival Palestinian party Fatah in the occupied West Bank, and so undermine any chance of a unified Palestinian cause.
It was sort of convenient for Netanyahu, for Hamas to be there, and it was convenient for Hamas for Netanyahu to be there, because it enabled him to sort of sideline this Israeli desire for a compromise.
In fact, Hamas has always been tied to Netanyahu's political fortunes. The group's suicide attacks in the 1990s pushed many Israelis to start to question the Oslo peace accords. Oslo advanced the possibility of a two-state solution. For the first time, both Israel and the Palestinian Authority recognize each other's right to self-determination. But Netanyahu opposes the process and argues that the rise in terrorist attacks from Hamas, who also want the accords to fail, prove Palestinians can't be trusted to keep the peace.
Gaza has become a terrorist haven where the Hamas and others do anything they wish.
It's textbook Netanyahu politics.
He's this pragmatic, conservative, incrementalist who has a pessimistic worldview, but he's also an incredible opportunist as a politician.
Riding a wave of rising opposition to the Oslo Accords, he infamously speaks at one event where Yitzhak Rabin, prime minister at the time and the architect of the peace process, is portrayed as a Nazi. Netanyahu's Likud party votes against the adoption of the Accords, including future prime minister Ehud Olmert.
It was a mistake. I made a mistake. They were a turning point in the history of the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians.
Prime Minister Rabin is then assassinated by a far-right Israeli extremist in 1995. His killer cites Oslo as a betrayal of the Jewish people in the West Bank.
Netanyahu was an inciting figure and a devising figure. I mean, even Rabin blamed Netanyahu for inciting against him. And he never said he was sorry or took responsibility for anything at that time.
Less than a year later, Netanyahu narrowly wins the general election, promising to be tough on terror. But ever the pragmatist, and seeing that a large number of Israelis still want a two-state solution, he continues negotiations with the Palestinians. With Netanyahu agreeing to further withdrawals from the occupied West Bank, his right-wing support turns on him, and he loses the 1999 election.
The lesson he sort of draws from that is that you should never make any more enemies on the right. Do not tick off the base.
And so in 2005, back in government as finance minister, he resigns in protest when Israel's Prime Minister Ariel Sharon agrees to pull military forces out of and dismantle settlements in Gaza, an area occupied by Israel since 1967. Netanyahu actually votes with the government 4 times in support, before dramatically quitting, inflicting huge political damage on Sharon.
I cannot be a partner to a move that I think compromises the security of Israel.
He resigned because at that time he realized that he may have a better position to challenge the prime minister if he joined forces with the more extreme right-wing factions in the Likud and in the Knesset.
Sharon quits the party he founded, and Netanyahu replaces him as leader of Likud. He wins the 2009 election, the beginning of more than a decade as Israel's prime minister. Netanyahu has shown himself to be a shrewd and stubborn political operator, an opportunist and survivor. But what does he actually believe? His father, Benzion Netanyahu, was an academic and part of a Zionist movement that called for a more hardline approach to Arabs living in the region and supported settler expansion. It's also said he held a pessimistic view of Jewish history, one of constant persecution and betrayal.
And this leads Netanyahu to sort of embrace a very sort of cynical approach to politics, which is that the only thing that really matters is hard power, because when the chips are down and everyone is coming for you, no one's going to come and stand up for you, especially if you're Jewish.
His older brother, Yonatan, or Yoni, also shapes Netanyahu's approach to politics. A special forces soldier, Yoni was killed in Uganda after rescuing hostages from a hijacked plane. Netanyahu says it reinforced his hardline attitude against all forms of terrorism. And his apparent opposition to a two-state solution is on the record as a young man too. In 1978, 2 years after his brother was killed, Netanyahu appears on a US debate show.
Do the Palestinians have a right to a separate state?
Well, I think that no, I don't think they do, but I think that...
Now, the man and his government today is the most radical it's ever been. Time and again in his political career, Netanyahu's been written off but has managed to survive. In 2021, his critics thought it really was the end, as corruption charges were brought against him, which he denies. But just a year later, against the odds, Netanyahu returns and forms a coalition with some of Israel's most right-wing groups to take back power. His cabinet now includes figures like Itamar Ben-Gvir, a convicted anti-Arab terrorist who has infamously handed out guns to settlers in the West Bank. And that relationship with the settler groups brings us back to the Hamas attacks on October the 7th. Because his government is accused of prioritizing the safety of settlers in the West Bank over the communities bordering Gaza, who have long opposed his stance on Hamas.
Netanyahu came to power with certain promises. I will protect you. I am the protector. Under my leadership, you will not see terror. I mean, big words and then zero action.
Netanyahu's now trying to seek revenge for October the 7th and destroy Hamas entirely. But neither critics or allies think he has a concrete plan for what happens next.
There has to be a different regime and a different future for Israelis and Palestinians alike. That's what will give hope to the Palestinians. We liberate them from Hamas.
And move forward on a two-state solution.
And move forward to make sure you don't have a terrorist state.
Many Israelis believe Netanyahu's political career will not survive the war, whatever the outcome.
After the war, there'll be a thorough investigation and everybody will have to answer some very tough questions, including myself.
Do you bear responsibility?
Now we're focused on one thing.
Do you bear
We
some
all bear responsibility.
Okay.
But he's been written off many times before and always found a way back. Can he do it again?